Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome back. Welcome back to the PorscheCooled Podcast. My name is Michael Barth, and this is Owner's Stories Day. We're up to number 68, and very shortly I'm going to be joined by Derek, and Derek's coming in from the US. Derek, by the list of cars that he's owned that he's just sent me yesterday, I think it was, Derek is a real car guy. I'm going to try and fit it all into an hour. I don't know how we're going to because he's had a lot of cars and a lot of Porsches in there as well. So we've got a good chat coming up. You would have seen from the title the couple that he has at the moment. So we're going to talk about those. And that's about it. So let me just get Derek. He's coming in from the US. I haven't actually asked Derek exactly where he is, but he's coming in from the US. And we're going to start talking to Derek about his PorscheCooled owner story. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to the PorscheCooled Podcast, and welcome back to Owner Stories. Like I said, number 68. We're almost at 70, only a couple more to go. Hopefully, I'll get that far. Today, I want you to welcome Derek. Derek's here with me now. Good evening, Derek. Thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Hey, good evening, Michael. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
And I'd like to apologize before we go any further because I did cancel you the other day, so I apologize for that. Unfortunately, my day job got in the way, as it does every now and again.
It's a pesky thing. Not a problem.
So Derek's coming in from the US, just so the listeners know. Derek, you're in New Hampshire, correct? You told me, which is in New England. I got it right.
Yes, the northeast of the United States.
I have been, I just want to let you know, I have been looking at your Instagram too, and I noticed there was a car on your Instagram which you haven't given me on your list. So I'm wondering where that came from.
Which one was that?
The 356.
Oh, I don't have it on there.
No.
I sent, just so everyone knows, I shot over a quick list of some of the cars I've owned in the past to Michael, so that's what he's referencing.
Is that an old photo, is it?
It was a 64 356. I guess I don't have that on my list.
Oh, maybe you do. Maybe you do. I just saw it on your Instagram and I thought that was a current photo. Oh, you do, 64 356. But that's not a current car though, is it? Before we get into it. It is not.
No. It's one I've unfortunately let go.
Very unfortunate because the C is the one. I want to talk about that when we get into your Porsches because I don't understand why you would let that one go. That one's a fantastic one to keep. It's a keeper.
Yeah. I know. It was a real beauty too.
All right, let me just let the listeners know. So Derek sent me across a list, and Derek's one of the few owners that I've had on. There's been a handful of the owners that actually have a lot of cars. Derek's got a really strong car passion. I can see by the cars he's owned. He's had a lot of cars in total. I didn't add up the total, Derek. I don't even know how many there are. There's a lot. But I will let the listeners know now there's 11 Porsches I counted. Derek's into bikes as well, so we're going to talk about that. But before we get into the cars, before we get into where it all started, before we get into where all the Porsches started, let's go back to the very beginning. And when you first started noticing Porsche, Derek, was it something when you were growing up that you used to see around the neighborhood or you used to have friends or family own it? When did you first start noticing Porsche? And when did this car bug happen to you? When did it all start for you?
Sure. Well, where I grew up, it was pretty blue collar, and I can't ever truly remember seeing, the classic story of a Porsche driving by or, on a school bus, seeing one pull up next to you or anything like that. There was a Porsche dealer a few towns over, but, we really never had any occasion to go by there. The funny thing is, I think my first exposure to the brand was someone had given us, I must have been maybe 8 or 10 years old, and they gave us a die cast Porsche models. Not matchboxes, but they were maybe 6 or 8 inches long. They were made of kind of a heavy die cast, and I remember specifically that there was a brown long hood, and then there was like a police branded, like a German police branded early 911, and I think a 356 too. And my younger brother and I would race them around the house and smash them into things, and as little kids do, not appreciating them, and the doors would fall off and the hoods would fall off, and we really beat them up, unfortunately. But I always remember just thinking they had such a cool shape, so unlike anything else I had ever seen. So I do think that stuck with me. And then fast forwarding to a high school, one of the kids in my high school pulled up in, I think it might have been a 2.7, maybe like a 76 or a 77. It was pretty beat up, but he and his dad were working on it, and he pulled up to high school in it, and I was just like, God, that was like out of a movie. It was like, just kind of got up and he walked into class, and I just looked at it. I was like, oh my gosh, what is that? So I think ever since then, that was really where my attention kind of came from to the brand. And, it wasn't until after college that I kind of dove in myself and started with the transaxles and worked my way towards the rear engine cars.
So when did the motorcycle bug start kicking in? Was that from a young age, or did that happen a little bit later in life?
No. My parents told me that they'd kill me if I ever got a motorcycle. And so it was never in my plans. And my brother found an old beat up Kawasaki something or other. And I think it was running on 3 of the 4 cylinders. And he stashed it at my house. And it was sitting in my driveway for, a month or 2. And then one day I just said, you know what, I'm just going to take it up and down the road. I made it maybe 20 feet. And I was like, oh my God, this is just so crude and so awesome. And I don't even think I had a helmet on. It was awesome. And after that, I was like, all right, that's it. And I went and took a course.
Yeah, I have the bug as well to get another motorcycle. I shouldn't, but I have the bug. I've only ever owned one, and it's very small cc, like 250cc when I basically learned. And I had it
What
for
was
about
the brand?
Honda.
Oh, beautiful.
A Honda VTR 250 I had, because that was the bike you had to get to learn on here in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
And I had it for, 4 years or 3 or 4 years. And then I got rid of it. But I always sort of still look. I'm still looking. It never goes away. Because there's a different feeling, isn't it? That feeling when you're on a motorcycle and you're, especially on, curvy roads and things like that, in the air on a nice day when it's a bit crisp. It's just a really cool feeling.
I do think it's as close to that pure driving feeling as you can get. I know people say having a convertible is like that, but I do think a bike is one step above.
Yeah.
And, sometimes I would even say those smaller bikes, the smaller Hondas, are even more pure too, because you're not sitting in it, you're sitting on it.
Yeah.
And you on a quiet morning, it's just you and nature, which is just fantastic.
They're a great little bike. They were very reliable and very, spirited sort of little bike for what they were.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's get into the cars. We have the car collection. We have the list of cars that you've owned over the years. And it's about 40 cars, 40 odd cars, I think, in total, including motorcycles. Cars and motorcycles, about 42, I think, from your list. Yeah,
I have a problem.
When you have a problem, other people have said the same thing, actually, other owners. When you get to that many, though, we always like to talk about the most memorable one, Derek, the most memorable one, whether it be the first one, because it was the first car you could afford to buy, or was it one of them in between? And then I'd like to ask you the other question as well. What is the one you regret selling the most out of that list? Normally we buy a car at certain times in our life, and that makes us remember that car. What is the most memorable car out of that list for you? Or you can have more than one, of course.
Yeah, no, it's a great. I have different cars that are memorable for different reasons. Learning to drive a stick on one of my very first cars, Honda Prelude, little teeny 2-liter, I thought was an absolute rocket. If you had told me that this was as close to a Ferrari as you could get, I would have believed you. I can only imagine if I were to get back in it now, but I learned to stick on that. And I had such amazing memories of, hitting 100 miles an hour and, driving around with 5 friends in it, and they're coming out the window. So great memories there. Learning to drive on an old, Grand Marquis station wagon with the wood panels on the sides and, the big.
Oh, okay.
So there for sure. And then, but I would say probably a car that still holds my heart, because I loved looking at it, was my first Porsche. It was an 87 944S, black on black. And I just thought it was the coolest thing. It just standing still with the haunches and the shape and the stance. And I just think it's a beautiful car. And I was so proud to own it. So definitely a favorite.
So that was the 944S. So the list of cars you gave me, is that the list of order you purchased the cars? That's where that's from beginning to end?
It is. Yeah.
It is. So the Grand Marquis station wagon, that's the one with the wood. That's what you had as your very first car. Then you had the Prelude, like you said, which was an 80s Prelude. And then you've had another couple of cars in between there, a Mercury Cougar, which I'm not familiar with. And then you've had another wagon. So you go from those cars, and then you think one day, I want a Porsche. It's a jump. What made you think about getting a Porsche? What was the deciding factor there? And why did you go for the 944 instead of, say, a 911?
Oh, it was because I was working a job making less than zero money. And a 911 was just so far outside of my realm of conception. But I did know someone that had a 944. It was a Guards Red, and it was absolutely gorgeous. And they babied it, and they took better care of it than any car I'd ever seen. And so it had always stuck in my head. And, back then, this was pre-internet, really.
Yeah.
I would go on the want ads, and there was a want ad for a 944 ass black on black, and it was in the next town over. And I didn't even know what it looked like at the time. I had to go look it up, but I just kind of had for the price, I think it was maybe $4,000 or something like that. And I didn't even have that. I think I had to take a loan out to buy it, but I just said, why not? It's kind of that youthful exuberance mixed with what can possibly happen, not understanding what the cost of a window regulator is for a 944 and that it could probably bankrupt you,
Did you know anything about 944s at the time, Derek? I mean, because you bought a 944, but you didn't just buy a 944, you found a 944S. And like you said, the days where a lot of people, I'm sure there's a few listeners of the podcast that won't remember it, where there was, no images on ads. It was basically you go and look for an ad and that was it. You go and look for a car and then you find out what it's like when you stumble upon it. But did you know the difference between a 44 and a 944 and a 944S? Or was it just by chance you happened to get the S, which is, as we know, the slightly better one?
Yes. No, I didn't know, quite honestly. And I didn't know, what did it say on the side? Ventilator on the side and 16 valve. I really had no idea. And it wasn't until later that I found out the difference.
So how was that feeling then? Because it's your first Porsche, right? So there is a lot of joy there when people get their first Porsche. And you've had, Mercuries, you've had a couple of Mercuries, you've had the Honda Grand Marquis station wagon, so completely different cars. And then you go and pick up this black on black 944. How was the drive back after you picked it up from the previous owner?
Well, it's a funny story. Well, the heat was stuck on. And so it was the dead of summer and the heat was stuck on. And I was dying, dying of heat. I had the sunroof, propped up on its little legs, the windows down, and just the heat was just blasting. And I drove it down probably about an hour to visit my girlfriend because I wanted to show her, my girlfriend, now wife.
Right.
I was so proud of it. And so I pull up outside of her place and she comes out and she had no idea what it was. She grew up in a small, little village. And I was just so proud of this car. It was so beautiful. And I said, we're going to go out to dinner. Come on. So we hop in and we head downtown, and it's in a city called Providence. And I park the car not on the main street because it was very crowded and God forbid I get a ding on the door. So we park a street back and we get out and I grab my wallet out of the back seat and lock up and we head to dinner. And through dinner, I'm having a lovely conversation, but I'm always thinking about my brand new car sitting over there, God forbid
Yes.
Someone walked by it, So dinner finishes up and we head back and I see my car and it's under a street lamp and it's absolutely gorgeous, and it looks like it's sitting on a pile of snow. It's like glistening, and this is the dead of summer.
Right.
And it wasn't. It was broken window.
Oh, really?
And someone had bashed in on my first day of ownership, in the window and stolen, my laptop and whatnot that was inside. And so I was absolutely crestfallen, and we get in the car and I'm driving her back to her place, and I pull up to a stoplight right outside of her place. And all of a sudden someone yelled some obscenity, and of all things, a yogurt packet flew through the air and hit the windshield.
Really?
And splatted yogurt all over the front of the car. And I couldn't even see. The windshield wipers, made a big streak. And so that was my first day of ownership. I was so proud. And
So a broken window, a break-in, and abuse on the way back.
a bit. So I
That's
guess
terrible.
it's one entry in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it got better from there, Michael.
I was going to say it could only get better. It must have got better because you've owned another 10 since then, so it must have got better. It didn't deter you at all. It didn't make you keep away from the brand.
Not at all. It was nothing I had ever driven. Now, granted, I hadn't driven much at that point, but handled like a 944. The steering was just beautiful. The balance was wonderful. It didn't have a ton of power, but again, for someone at my age at that time, it had plenty of power, and I had a blast, and I loved it.
So what else out of the list of cars, though? What are the other cars there? And we'll get into the Porsches in depth. But what about the other cars there? Was there anything that you regret selling? Was there another car there, a memorable car, or a car you really do think, well, I should have kept that one today because that was in hindsight, that was a really special car?
A lot of the cars that I've owned, I used in business. I drive a lot. And so I'd put, 30, 40,000 miles a year on a lot of, the BMWs or the BMW sedans or the BMW SUVs. And so I can't say that any of them I miss, bar I did have a BMW X5 diesel.
Right.
And that little truck, I had snow tires on it. It would go through any storm. It was the most comfortable, beautiful SUV. It was actually one of my favorite cars, that are outside of the sports arena I've ever owned. I absolutely loved it. And I drove it to 180,000 miles, and I was gutted when the motor gave up because I wanted to drive it more.
What year was that, Derek? Which one was that? The X5?
That was an 014.
14. Okay. All right. So let's get into that because we're going to go through all the Porsche. I think we will go through all the Porsches you've owned because I think there's probably a little story to each of them, and I think the listeners would like to hear those stories because you've had a really good selection of Porsches. A lot of people, listening to the podcast will think, wow, I want to have one of those, or, how did you manage to get that, especially when we talk about a 930 and things like that, and the 356C, for example, and the car you have today, which is, one of my favorites, which is the one that I always, as much as a 912 fan that I am, and I've spoken about it many times before, and I haven't gone off that trip, the 911T is the one that I would prefer. You know what I mean? That's always the one that I prefer, and I know you have one of those, and we're going to talk about that. So when it comes to, your current cars, I mean, it seems like you said, you've had a lot of a lot of cars that you use for work, and it seems like you've had cars that you use for the bikes as well, right? So out of your current cars, you have a GMC, which is a truck. I'm guessing that's a truck, right? The 1500.
A pickup truck, yeah.
Yeah, so that'd be for the bikes. So you have practical cars for the bikes. Is that what you mainly use that for?
to put the bikes in the back to take them places.
Do you transport them places or not?
The state I live in, Michael, is pretty rural, and so I'm really blessed to go out my door and have some beautiful driving roads. So I don't generally have to transport my bikes much by the truck, unless I have to, take them to a shop and I can't do the work myself.
Oh, right. Okay. So let's start with the Porsches then. Let's start at, we've gone through the 944S, and that was the second Porsche that you owned. Let's just briefly go through these ones till we get to the current day. So the first Porsche you owned, the very first one, was that the 44 or was that the 924?
The 944 was the first one that ran and drove, and it was my daily driver. The 924 was a real bucket of bolts. My little brother found it again in the want ads, I think, and it was one of those where it was in the yard and the hood was up, and we pulled up, and I think it was guards red at one point in its life, but it had a lot of primer, and
right.
Someone was trying to make a Carrera GT out of it, and they had cut the wheel wells, and it was a mess. And so he somehow got it started for us to prove it worked. I don't know what wires he crossed, but it sat in our garage. And I'll say this, the one thing two things that were wonderful about it is it got us to dream about what could be. And we were excited for that. And we also learned how to read German wiring diagrams, which is a whole feat in itself.
So did you and your brother work on that car? Did you try to get it back and running? Did you?
Yes. Yeah. That was, it was pretty much pre-internet. and we found some shop manuals, and we never got it on the road. I'm really sad to say. We tried really hard, but we were kind of going to school and going off to college, and it just kind of fell by the wayside.
Okay, so you start to get familiar with the brand, though. You're getting familiar with the brand, and that was the first. So that was the very first one, then, the 924 Turbo.
Yes.
Okay, so then you bought the 944S. What happened after the 944S? How long did you keep that for, and was it trouble-free motoring during the time of ownership?
In retrospect, I would say it was under my ownership. There were little things that went, as you'd expect with an older car.
Yeah.
And I tried to fix what I could myself. A starter goes or some brakes. I taught myself how to do that back then. I passed it along to my younger brother when I got the 911 SC. And unfortunately, the timing belt went on the 944S and it bent a valve. And, the Achilles heel of that car. And
yes.
So unfortunately he had to sell it along.
So what happens after the 944 then? What do you start looking for then? Do you think then, okay, I've got enough money, I'm earning good money now, prices have come down maybe, do I look for a 911?
So I did, yeah. I think I passed the 944 to him, and I found a 911 SC. I still was not making very good money or really any money, but back then a 911 was a $10,000, $12,000 car, and so I was able to stretch and get that because I don't know. I think my whole thing then was, why wait until I'm 65?
Yes.
It's a beautiful car. It's fantastic. If I have to take a loan out, I know it's not fiscally responsible. And again, being completely, ignorant to realities, I just thought it would be a daily driver and I wouldn't have any issues with it. Right. So why not have a classic 911 as your daily driver?
Yeah, and the SC was a good price at one point there, wasn't it? It wasn't too expensive compared to other 911s, so it was a good entry to get in. It was one of those models that, let's be honest, a lot of people didn't like. Only people started to like them again now. It was hated for a bit there. What year did you buy that, though? How long ago was that?
Well, I want to say that was probably in 2004. 2005, yes. So they were still $10,000, $12,000 for a decent one. And I have to say that car was just such a magnificent car, and it was bulletproof. It really was. That motor, it started up in the dead of winter. I drove it every day for, I think I probably put 30,000 miles on it. And at that time it was already a 22-year-old car.
Yeah, exactly.
Such a wonderful car.
So when you get your Porsches, though, are you let's use that word that everyone uses. Are you a purist? Do you like to keep the cars original? Do you like to play around with these cars once you've started buying them? I mean, you've had the 944S and now you're into a 911. We're going to get onto the next one in a second. But is that something you do, or you just like to keep them pretty much original?
I'll be honest. I think at that time, I didn't know what I was, and I didn't have any money to be anything else, outside of listening to an air-cooled engine. When I felt that car made me fall in love with the brand. The 944S was a great car and I really appreciated it. The 911 SC made me fall in love with the brand because I remember specifically I was in a really terrible mood one day, maybe something associated with work, and I was on the highway and I dropped it down one gear, and the engine was just singing at, I don't know, maybe 5,500 RPM. And it was just the most relaxing thing. And I just fell in love with that car. So I didn't have any money to modify it. As a matter of fact, I think I even sold a couple parts it came with. I think the guy had like some sort of big aftermarket exhaust that was crazy loud that I ended up selling. But no, that was just really more of a transport. And then I just fell in love with it.
What was the main difference then from going, people who don't know who are listening, the main difference from going from a 944 to a 911? Was it the balance of weight? Was it the power? Was it just the history of the 911? What was it that you think that made it feel just, like you said, you went out on that drive and it just, blows you away? It's relaxing. It's just a different experience. Yeah.
The 944 is a wonderful driving car from a technical standpoint. It goes around curves beautifully. It handles wonderfully. But it doesn't have a ton of character when you compare it to a 911 SC. It's a little more muted.
Right.
You can't really hear the motor. Where the 911 SC is just, it's so loud and raucous, at least to me at that time, it was just so much more engaging. And as we kind of talk about some of the cars that I've had the pleasure of owning, I think it's a search for more engagement, more character, making more of a connection. And sometimes I have a car that does that more than another. And so the 911 SC, the sound, the smell of the oil, the smell of the leather, it was just a wonderful experience.
Okay. And so you've got the SC, you've got the Super Carrera. We all want a little bit more. We always drive our car for a bit and think we just want a little bit more power. We want something a little bit more special. Is this why the next car happened? Tell the listeners what came after that, because it's a special one.
Yes. Yeah. So I had sold that car. I was working quite a bit, and I think I had a motorcycle for a time, one or two bikes, and then I just missed the 911. And I had heard wonderful things about the turbo. There was a video Porsche put out probably back in the 80s or 90s where they kind of talked about their 911s, and like the final car they showed was the 930. It was going up over these hills with these beautiful haunches and just this gorgeous black shape. And I said, wow, that's just a beautiful car. And so that's what I searched for. And I found one a few states away. And again, all of these things have to kind of be looked at through the prism of, they weren't what they are now in terms of how they're regarded, in terms of what they're worth. If anything, my friends always joke with me that I have the pleasure of finding and falling in love with cars about 3 or 4 years before they get really valuable and famous. And I've already sold them.
That's okay though, Derek, because you're buying it for the passion. You know what I mean? You're buying it because you really enjoy buying it. And who knew and I'm guessing you bought that 930 in 2005, 2006 or something, was it? Or a bit later?
I think it was probably, it was the car I got married in. We left the church in it. So I think that
fantastic.
was 07, 08. Gosh,
but
I
you
should
sold
know
it.
that.
You sold the car. You sold the car you got married in.
I know.
we won't get into that.
No. But well, listen. So, all right. Here comes the first controversial thing I'll say.
Right.
The 930 is a beautiful car to look at.
Yes.
It's not necessarily a beautiful car to drive. And
yes. I've heard other people say that too.
Yes. And I'll tell you why. And again, please, these are my opinions from me, because I'm sure your audience is screaming at their radio right now. But
yes.
Yeah, no, it's an iconic car, no doubt. And it's gorgeous. That motor has such low compression that when you're not on boost, just puttering around town, it's a real chore to drive.
Yes.
It goes beyond engaging. It's actually work. And, you'll break a sweat if you're in traffic and you're trying to change lanes and you're trying to, go down like small, slower roads. It's sprung a little bit more tightly, so it doesn't do great over, rough roads. But the real thing for me and why I actually decided to sell it was, they always talk about how the turbo is a light switch. You hit 4,000 and all of a sudden the boost is there. Yes. Well, that couldn't be more correct. And I found that the only time I ever really opened it up was on an on-ramp to a highway. You'd do the on-ramp, you'd be first was good for 60 miles an hour. So you'd nail first, slam it into second, you'd be doing 100 miles an hour in second. And then all of a sudden you shift to fourth because it was only 4-speed. And then it might as well have been a Honda because you're just on the highway, doing highway speed. So it was almost too much car for the highways to really enjoy. And to really enjoy it, you had to be going fast.
I think that's a general opinion of the 930, isn't it? I mean, as groundbreaking as it was when it came out in the 70s, you know what I mean? It really was. The technology behind it, all of that, all of the things behind the turbo, the 930 Turbo were groundbreaking for Porsche. It was a huge car for them. But that thing
for
with
sure.
the boost and, like you said, and the power, that's been said. I've heard that on other podcasts. I've read articles about it. I think someone else who's been on Owner Stories told me about it. In fact, I think even James at Porsche Platts here in Australia from Adelaide, RSR Classics, I mean, he always loved the SC. He said the SC is a great 911 for the power delivery, for the experience. I don't know whether he compared it to a turbo, but I know he said the SC was one of his favorites, and he's owned a few.
But you know what, Michael? The SC had 5 gears, and the turbo had 4.
4 gears,
and
yeah.
So, if your idea of driving, especially on B roads, right, is growing through the gears and enjoying yourself,
Yeah.
you never did that with a turbo because you were in second gear where you were doing 30 or you're doing 90. You never had to shift.
But the turbo looks very cool.
Beyond cool.
What
Just
color did you have?
absolute sexiness. It was, I'm afraid I don't remember the paint code number. It was black, but it was kind of like a gray black. It was like a ghost black. It was pretty beautiful.
So how long did you keep it for? Did you keep it for very long, or was it just too much of a car and you thought it's not giving me the pleasure that I need from a 911?
I had it for a few years. And also, like, to be fair to the car, I wasn't at a place in my life yet. I was still, just married. We lived in an apartment, and it lived outside under a car cover, if you can imagine.
Oh, right.
In New England, which, we get snow. I mean, our winter is 6 to 8 months long. So it wasn't really fair to the car. I ended up selling it probably after 2 or 3 years, and wanted something maybe a little bit more engaging, something that kind of going back to the SC. I find myself always chasing that SC in terms of the experience.
Oh, it's good to know. Yeah, I know the SC is it's really come of age, the SC. I have to say it really has. The prices have gone up. I mean, I don't know prices in the US. I know prices in Australia have gone up a lot. But, even the turbo, the 930 turbo, you had the 79 turbo. It's probably 5 times the amount now than what it was in Australia in 2005. That's how much it's gone up, if not more.
So I would say the same multiplier here. Yep,
same multiplier? Yeah, it's a bit crazy. I mean, look, we all have a life to live, and things happen in our life. And when you buy these cars and you don't realize what you have, until later, and things change with Porsche so quickly. Things that are hated are loved, and things that are invaluable are valuable. So you never know. But, even the small collection you have, do you ever think back and think, wow, if I would have had these cars in my garage outside now, and I've got a great Porsche collection?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I could kick myself in terms of that, but, I didn't, I have had more experiences since then. So maybe I could appreciate the 930 more for sure now, but I'm glad I had it for the time I had it. It was a wonderful thing. I have great memories, but I don't necessarily miss it. And I know that's probably sacrilege to say, but, I love to drive my cars. I love to drive them. And if I don't enjoy driving them and it's not the first car I want to hop into, it doesn't matter if I have 1 or if I had 5. I just, they'll fall apart if you don't drive them. So.
Exactly. And look what you've experienced already. We're at the, 924. Well, 924 was a different one, but the 944S, the 911SC, the 930. So what comes next? Because we go a bit of a change of pace here. You've had air-cooleds, and now we're going to something different. What comes next, Derek?
Yeah. So, and again, I seemed at that point in my life, I'd bounce between a sports car and then I'd miss driving a motorcycle. So I'd sell that car and I'd get a motorcycle, usually like an older BMW Airhead or something like that. And then I'd drive the motorcycle for a year or two, and then I'd miss a Porsche and I'd go back to that. So after that, I actually found I think it was an 06 Boxster S.
Okay.
So second generation convertible, blue. I'm in love with the Porsche blue colors, and it was blue on beige saddle interior. It was a really sharp car.
And how was the Boxster all round as a driver's car? Did it feel better to you than being in the turbo?
From a driving standpoint, yes. I know that sounds crazy, but from a day-to-day enjoying driving, it was much more accessible. You weren't afraid to park at places. You could do, a couple 100 miles without an issue or any worries. It was nice in that respect. It was definitely more modern. So you lost a lot of the character. But I don't know, it's kind of funny, right? Like, as cars get more and more sterile and they get more and more insulated in the pursuit of comfort, I find myself going back to cars that I thought were insulated and saying, man, those are actually drove pretty darn well, you know?
So that was quite new. Was that quite new at the time? Sorry, Derek. That was quite new at the time when you bought that then, because it was an '06, wasn't it? The Boxster S, right?
It was a few years old, maybe. I think maybe this was maybe 09, 2009, 2010.
But it's a manual, right? For sure.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
So you have the Boxster. We've got to get to the current one because I want to talk about the current one. We have the Boxster, and then you go back to air cooled. Tell the listeners what you bought after that. So was there a bike in between this one? Was there a BMW? Because you're a big BMW fan, aren't you? And I think anyone that looks at motorcycles has to appreciate BMWs because they're really great bikes. And I noticed you've got an R9T as well, your current bike, which I think are really nice looking bikes. My friend in Bahrain actually just picked up he's got a KTM Super Duke. I think it is Super Duke 11, going by memory here, 1100 or 1190, I think it is. And he just picked up a 90s R1100 GS, I think.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah. The BMW bikes are, compared to a Ducati or some of the Japanese bikes, they really drive like tractors, but I think that's why I love them. That, number one, pretty much any BMW motorcycle that's a GS, which I've had a couple GS adventures, as well as a lot of the older Airheads, the /5s and /6s.
Right.
You can work on them on the side of the road, and you can do all the own maintenance yourself. And so I really love that because I really love to work on my own stuff. And then, beyond that, there's something just pure about them that once you get the carbs tuned up, they sing. And It's a very honest mechanical sound. And I found that BMWs are one of the bikes that really speak to me. So I really love them. I think that they're an acquired taste, but I find them beautiful.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think they go well with the Porsches as well. It's kind of nice side by side. I mean, some of those old GSs are beautiful though. Some of the, the white, red and blue ones and some of the really early ones are beautiful. So you had the Boxster. You get into another BMW after that, another bike, and then you get into another air-cooled. Tell the listeners what you bought next, Derek.
I think after that, I had a 95 993. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I had a 914.
914, yes.
Yes, the 914. But again, this was a lot like that 924 turbo that I had. I found it in a yard in New Hampshire. It was covered in moss, in tree branches. And, I think like any car guy, right? You see it and you just think of potential. Oh gosh, what it could be, right? Like,
how is the rust?
It was there. Definitely there, Michael. It was there. So, but my eyes were bigger than my reason. And I put it on a trailer and took it home to my garage, and on Craigslist, I sourced a 914 race motor from a race engine, from a race car. And I was going to pull out what was the motor in that? Like a 1.4, 1.7. It was a 1.7. I was going to pull that out. So then I put the race motor in, and I was going to enjoy the 914, but the motor had been sitting for so long that the clutch was frozen.
Right.
And so it wouldn't move. And instead of pulling it all apart again after all those hours of work of the engine swap, I ended up putting it up on Craigslist and selling it.
Well, you're going to do this, but you're going to do the work yourself.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So you're quite mechanical then. You like working on your cars as much as you do on your bikes.
I do. Yeah. I have a little lift, and in my basement, I have a lift for my motorcycles, and I love to wrench in my non-existent free time for sure. But I wouldn't say that I'm mechanically inclined, because I'm the guy that will, if there's a right way and a wrong way, I'll do it wrong twice before I can figure out the right way, and learn from pain.
Are there some things, Derek, that you won't touch? That, you have the lift, you can work on your cars, you can work on your bike. So there's certain things you go, hang on, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to give it to the specialist.
When it gets into severe electrical work, like pulling the dash out. Sometimes that gets me a little worried. I think I would say the only thing that I definitely stay away from is I have not rebuilt a Porsche motor. And, I haven't taken that step yet. Everything else, I'll give it a swing. And if for some reason it doesn't work out, then, hopefully I can fall into the arms of a good Porsche mechanic, but I'll give it a try first.
There's some good mechanics in New Hampshire.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's a shop in New Hampshire called Vintage Sports Restoration, VSR1, and they're kind of renowned as I think at least in the nation, maybe even in the world, one of the top BMW restorers.
Okay.
And they also do some wonderful Porsche work. So Mario and Chris over there are just the absolute best.
That's great. Great, you have something so close by, something so good.
Yep, absolutely. And you know what the best part is, Michael, is they don't make me feel bad when I walk in there with my tail between my legs because something's rusted solid.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. All right, so the 914 didn't work out. It was a good idea, though. I mean, it didn't work out, so you got rid of that on Craigslist. And then comes and you mentioned already, then comes another air-cooled, more modern.
Yep.
Tell the listeners what you bought next.
Yep, my 95 993 with the... Yep, it was another blue car. It was blue with a, I don't know what Porsche called it. It was kind of, I guess that now they call it like a yachting blue interior. It was a blue on blue.
Okay.
But it grows on you. At first I was kind of like, oof, but it definitely grows on you. And also at that time, even back then, this is probably 2011, 2012. The 993s weren't growing on trees. So when I found a good one that looked nice and checked out on PPI, I said, all right, let's do it. It was a C4.
Oh, it was a C4. Was it so manual?
Oh, sure. Yep.
Yep. Yeah, it's funny with the 993, isn't it? There seems to be a lot with grey interiors. Grey interiors are quite popular. And blue on blue is very popular. I've seen a few of those pop up, whether in the UK or here.
Really?
Sort of matching colors. What's the other color? White and green. The adventure and whatever you call it, green. The one that Steve had. That always sort of comes up every now and again. That's a pretty special color. So how was the 993 then compared to the other 911s you've owned? The 930, the 911 SC. Think back to the driving experience, Derek. How was the experience in the 993? Did it feel too modern for an air-cooled, or did it feel better?
Well, from where I was at that point in kind of my journey, it definitely felt much more modern, much more sorted. It had the G50 transmission. It was a comfortable car. It was certainly a car you could drive every day. And I did. I drove it a lot. And I even had winter tires and I drove it in the winter. It was a lot of fun. It was definitely, you could see what Porsche did. And I've never owned a 964, but you could see what Porsche did in terms of taking the car to its next logical step. And having driven a 996, it definitely kind of splits the difference. I enjoyed it. I thought it was great, and I owned it for many, many years. And that was a car I actually did modify later in my ownership. Actually, right before I sold it, I did modify it pretty heavily with some KW suspension. And I went to Darren Pfister and got the Stage 2. I think you have that as well, right?
I have the Pfister on my 997, yeah. I think Steve, who does a podcast with me, he had on his 993, I think he had the Pfister exhaust on that. He did a lot of RS sort of type components or things like that. He did a lot of mods to his 993. But I think the Pfister exhaust for the 993 sounds pretty amazing, doesn't it? It's a very special one.
Oh, the sound, absolutely. The sound, with the Stage 2, I have a friend that has a Stage 3 in his 993, and it sounds great, but it is very loud.
Is that too loud, Stage 3?
Yes. Yeah.
It's too loud, right? Stage 2 is the sweet spot, I've read. Yeah.
It really is. It's Stage 3 is a little bit more look at me.
Yeah.
Stage 2 is for you. It's someone you can enjoy it yourself.
So the 993, when you bought it, was it a high mileage car or was it a low mileage car?
I want to say that I think it had maybe 42,000 miles on it.
Okay, so reasonably low. So you owned that for a few years. How long ago did you sell the 993, Derek?
I sold that car probably about 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years. So I had that car for about 6 or 7 years.
Wow, so that was one you really did enjoy.
I did. It was, you hear, there's all these like famous sayings, in Porsche ownership, and it's, that in the 993 is the ultimate air cooled. And if you really want an air cooled, then that's what you want. And I think that's why I went for it and I purchased it, and I enjoyed the ownership. I think having owned it, and again, here comes my next controversial statement. I would say that while it's a great car,
right,
from a looks standpoint, I think that the older cars are more impressive to me. I love how they look, and from a driving experience, it's just, the 993 is a really comfortable car you can drive every day. With the Fister exhaust, it was more visceral, no doubt, and with a more competitive suspension system, it sure handled great.
Yes,
but it wasn't as engaging as some of the older cars. And so I don't miss it.
Do you think that comes down to being a Carrera 4 and not a Carrera 2? Or you just think it's just...
No, I think that probably definitely has something to do with it. And I've never driven a Carrera 2, and I can't really speak from experience on that, but you could definitely feel the heavier front end on the Carrera 4. There's no doubt.
So you have the 993. I think you go into a bike after that, another BMW, right?
Yes. Yeah. An older /5 from the early 70s.
Yeah. Very, what was it? A 72. Oh, that's very special, that one. The R75s are nice. Very nice.
I still have that bike. It's one of my favorites.
Oh, that's the one still on your list. That's the current. Oh, right. You do too. Okay. Very nice. Very nice. So you go into that, then you have an Audi. We won't touch on the Audi. You have an Audi Q7. Then you get something pretty special, which you don't have today. Tell the listeners what came next, Eric.
So I actually had the 993 at the same time I found the 64 356C.
Okay.
And so I actually was very lucky enough to own them both at the same time for a period of time.
Fantastic.
And two beautiful cars, very different for sure. The 64 had a cool story. Actually, I purchased it from, are you familiar with Nathan Mers? He's pretty big with the Porsche Club of America over here.
Not really, no.
Sure, he does a lot of the on Tech Tactics. He does a lot of the valuation things of where Porsches are going. Okay. He's a really accomplished collector, but he's kind of one of the, I don't know if you'd use the word authority, but I do, because he's very knowledgeable. But anyways, he runs a small company where he finds really beautiful cars,
right?
Usually one owner, and then sells them along. So I found it through him, and it was a one owner car from 64.
Okay. So you bought, how many years ago did you buy that?
I purchased that, I would imagine, probably like 2015. Maybe 2016, something like that.
So we're looking at high values for a 356. Were you looking for a 356, Derek? Were you looking for a 356, or this one just came up and you thought it's a good time to dip my toes and try a 356? Because you bought the C, and I know the A's fetch higher values, right? But isn't the C the sought after one? Isn't that the one that people kind of enjoy the most?
I think that people agree that the C's are the most driver-focused cars. They're the ones that you can take on the road. They have power to keep up with traffic, and they have disc brakes to stop. So from a pure driving standpoint, they might be a little bit more approachable. I mean, the A's are gorgeous, for sure. But I actually think the C's are gorgeous too in their own way. But that's why I was looking for a C. If I was going to get a car, I wanted to drive it. And so that was kind of where I focused. I looked for it. It didn't come upon me. I was searching for a Bally Blue. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that color.
Yes, I am.
Just absolutely gorgeous. I couldn't find one. I honestly, I think I did PPIs on at least 4 or 5 cars across the country, and I could not find a good one. And so this was one of those times that, I listened to what the wiser Porsche owners say, where they say buy for condition, not for color.
Okay.
And so I did. And this was a ruby red. So not the brighter red. It was a dark maroon, beautiful color.
Which is a nice color. Yeah, it's a nice color. How was the
it
interior?
is.
So the condition of this car was pretty immaculate, was it? The interior and everything? Did you have to do anything to it once you purchased it?
Yeah, I put it up on my left. I think I had to swap out some shocks. I think I had to change out the headlights. I had to do a little bit of minor reconditioning on the motor, but Nathan did a really nice job of getting it sorted where it was in really nice shape to drive and it could be driven. So the owner was Air Force, maybe lieutenant, and he was fastidious when it came to records. So I got a book, Michael. I got a book that had it was a notebook that had every gallon of gas that had ever gone in the car.
Really?
Really, it was a rolling history project. It was just beautiful. And it was actually a real honor to own and to kind of continue that, continue the logbook on the gas and continue the receipts. And I actually reached out to the former owner and we kind of became friends because I just wanted him to know I was going to take care of the car.
How old was he then? He must have been in his
he was
80s,
in his
70s?
late 70s, early 80s, something like that. Yep.
Original owner.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, fantastic. So I'm guessing
really
that
cool.
sort of a car like that, you're not really going to mess with it, are you? You're not going to mod it. You're not going to change anything. You didn't change seats out or do anything like that.
No.
Was it
no?
Was it the 356? Is that an easy car to work on? Is it like working on a 912 or an early 65 911? It's quite an easy car.
It's a beautiful car to work on. Plenty of space. Everything's accessible. It was 6-volt still, and so once you kind of wrapped your head around that, it was nice. The toughest part of owning that car, Michael, was the ethanol gas that ran through it. Because if it would sit for a long time, right. I'd always back it out of my garage and I'd find a puddle of gas. And, one of the carbs I'd have to pull off and try to rebuild because the ethanol had eaten through the seals. Right.
Carburetors, can you actually work on those? Aren't they a bit tricky to work on those cars? That's that's very specialist work, Derek, to fix the carburetors on an early Porsche.
It's real black magic, and I wouldn't.
Time consuming, isn't it?
It is, and beyond rebuilding them, which I could do with my journeyman skill, getting them adjusted is the real trick, and
yes.
that I'm afraid I have to admit was beyond me.
Okay.
That's when I called up my friends.
You called your friends for that one. So you got the 356. Is your brother driving Porsches at the same time? Because your brother has a Porsche passion too, right? Has he got Porsches in the garage where you guys are going out on drives at this period? Because you got your 356. You must have friends that have something that's pretty special as well.
My brother's definitely a car guy. He went more into the BMW world. He went into kind of classic BMWs from the 80s. And so he's really a fan of the BMW marquee. And I do have friends that are car folks, but I have to say that I haven't found anyone as sick as I am when it comes to the brand. So usually like when I had the 993 and the 356, it was cool to have someone over and we'd go for a drive and swap off, and do that, which was great.
So which one went first then? You've got the 993. That's almost like a perfect two Porsche car collection really there, 993 and a 356C. People would be very happy with that. I'd be happy with that. So then you've got those two cars, Derek. You decide that one has to go or they both have to go. What happens?
I have a few kids and they were very small. And
right.
The 356 had no seatbelts. And so I found that when I was to drive that, it would always be by myself. And I could never take them with me. And I wanted to share that with them,
Yep.
So, and also with the 356, you've probably heard this before in your other owner stories, but it was so nice that you were petrified to park it anywhere. You never wanted to leave it overnight anywhere to go stay in a nice hotel or whatnot. So, I just would take it on A to A drives and that was fine. But if I couldn't take my little boys, then that was when I made the decision to sell it. And so it went to a really nice older lady out in California. She was an avocado farmer and she absolutely loves it.
Really? So how did you sell? How do you go about? So how did you go about selling the 356? Did you just do it privately, or you go through some kind of broker? How do you do it? You just organize the sale of your own cars?
Yeah. At that time, I definitely did. I think she actually found me through the Porsche Club of America. I think I posted it there. It wasn't, I guess really you just try to look for where you think people would appreciate it the most, right?
Yes.
And that was where I landed, and that's where it was found. And the 993 actually went on Red List, I think, and found a real enthusiast there.
The 356 was how many years of ownership, Derek?
I had that for, I would say, about three years.
Okay, so we don't like to talk dollars and cents that much here, but after 3 years on a 356C, you must have been quite happy when you moved that on. That would have given you money to get into your next Porsche.
Sure. Yeah. What I can say about pretty much all of my ownership of the brand, I've never gotten hurt. I've always ended up selling them before they explode in value,
Yes.
but I've always been able to really drive them and enjoy them and then pass them along and use that money to kind of roll into the next project. So it's been really fantastic in that respect. And the 356, it didn't appreciate greatly in my tenure, but it definitely, a couple $1,000s more, which was great. The 993 actually I bought back in 2012, and that doubled in value. So that was nice. But
wow.
Yeah. So they both went to great owners that really appreciated them.
Okay, so the two air-cooleds are gone. And what do you decide to do? What do you decide to buy? Do you get another air-cooled? What comes next?
Well, my wife had been driving, during she's had her Cayenne S, her 013 Cayenne S she's kind of had it for 6 or 7 years now. So she's had that throughout the ownership. But of course, I drive motorcycles for a bit, and then I go, what am I doing? I just missed a Porsche. And so yep. I found an 09 997 Carrera.
Perfect. Where did you find that? Was it a local car, or was it a?
No, that was down. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with the geography on the eastern seaboard of the United States, but it was in the state of Georgia. Okay. And so I actually was on a business trip and flew into Georgia instead of flying home. It was traded into a Mercedes dealership, and I found it online before they had posted it officially. And it was blue. It was that blue color. It was beautiful. It was a Carrera, base Carrera.
Yes.
But
0.2, 997.2 though, right? 2009. Yeah. So it's 0.2.
Yep. The .2. So I flew in. I'd given the guy a deposit right away. He's like, well, I could take some more pictures and get back to you. I said, nope. Here's a deposit, and I flew in.
Sorry, Derek. Why did you act so fast though? Is that because there are we know sometimes when cars Porsches list on Honda dealers or Mercedes-Benz dealers, sometimes the price is a little bit low. Sometimes the dealer is not really onto the pricing, or sometimes the dealer just wants to move it fast. Was that part of the reasoning, or this car was just a really good car and you wanted a 997?
I certainly was looking for the .2, and this was probably 2018, and there weren't that was in 09. So because of the 08-09 crisis, there weren't many in the U.S. From a volume standpoint. It was a beautiful blue with a black interior. It was a convertible Carrera, and it was just one of those things that the price was good. I would say it was good for what they were asking. I think that they just wanted they were a Mercedes dealership. They didn't want to sell a Porsche.
Yes.
And so it made sense there, but it was just one of, you get that feeling, Michael, and you're like, it feels good. Let's do it.
Look, the 997 is a great car. I've got the 0.1. 0.2's obviously a little bit better, less worry, I guess. But that's your second, well, we'll call the Boxster a convertible. That's your second convertible. The 914 has got the Targa roof, the removable roof. How's the convertible experience? Would you do it again?
I would. It's fun. I had great memories driving in that Boxster with my wife with the top down, and the music blasting and just enjoying a nice day. And I did that with the Carrera as well. I think it's a lovely thing, especially the newer ones. You don't have the chassis flex that you do like on an FC, where those actually, I'm sorry, I don't think the FCs were convertibles. I think it was the 3.2s.
Yes.
If you went over a bump in those, the whole car would just bend. And so you weren't compromised that it was a convertible, the newer ones, and I thought it was really lovely. They're pretty well insulated, and in the shape too. I think the 997 did a really great job with the convertible of keeping that silhouette, and so it looked good.
I think the 991 Cabriolet is actually a really good shape, though. I think the 991, they did it quite nicely with the roof. It's just the seamlessness of the roof going into the body. Obviously, the 992 is even, finessed even more. But the 997 experience, 997s are really sought after now, especially the 0.2s. And like you said, they were really rare because of the financial crisis in 08, 09. There's not many manuals. There's not many 0.2s coming up. And when they come up, in 2018, I think in Australia, they was probably selling for 140 for a 0.2, which is a lot. Considering a 0.1 is probably half that value.
Right.
Do you think was it a good ownership experience, the 997? Because you've missed the 996 here, and I want to ask you about that after that. And you missed the 964. But how was the experience of owning a 997? Because you didn't own it for very long, it looks like. You sold it off pretty quickly.
I did. And I'll certainly answer your question about what I thought of it. But the reason I sold it, I think I probably sold it prematurely, but I sold it at the beginning of the pandemic. Okay. Because just with the uncertainty of the world, it just didn't make sense to have a car at that point. And so, of course, in retrospect, right, because the world was going to end, the zombies were going to come down the street, and all that good stuff, and it
wasn't right. It wasn't the right time to own a Porsche, was it?
It didn't feel like the right time, but boy, oh boy, I'll tell you, the Porsche market has not done what I thought it was going to do, at that point. So, but the 997 Carrera, the first thing I'll say about that car is that it was incredibly fast for the base Carrera.
Yeah.
I drove an S or two, and certainly those were fast too, but I was always really surprised about just how quick that car was. I agree.
Even the 0.1, it's almost enough, isn't it? It really does feel like, especially when you're on a windy road, on a twisty road, a mountain road, and you're driving it through those roads, it feels like there's enough there. Obviously, you're not getting the handling and stuff of a GT3 or whatever, but the power-wise, the experience is more than plenty.
I think that's a wonderful way to describe it. I do. I think it was more than adequate. And, I found with that car, to really get engaged with it, you were doing illegal speeds. It was so capable that to feel a little bit crazy, you were doing something way crazy. And, again, to each his own, for sure. I thought that it was a beautiful car. The one thing that I was disappointed about it when I first got it was how quiet it was. It was a very quiet car compared to some of the cars I'd owned before.
Right.
And so I ended up getting stage 2 Pfister exhaust on that.
Nice.
And you know what I actually did is I took it a step further, and I got actually, you know what, Michael, it's funny. I actually think when I was researching the exhaust, I think I watched your videos.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I did.
That's an old one. That's an old one.
It's an oldie but a goodie. But
yeah, no, I like the Pfister. I mean, Darren's a great guy, and he does a great product, and it's become so popular over the years. I mean, really has. And he started with the 993s, didn't he? 964s or 993s, and then 997s, and I mean, it's a great product for the cost. It really does, and it still sounds. Look, my car, when you start it on the 997.1, it sounds amazing. When you're reversing, it sounds amazing. When you're going through the twisties, it sounds amazing. But you don't have that drone in the cabin. It's not terribly loud when you're just driving, but that's kind of what I wanted. Do you know what I mean? That's what I wanted. But when you really want to experience it, the sound is there, which is more than enough, I think. I say it's more than enough. The other day I drove my car and I thought I need more, but I think it really is. I drove it again the other day and it feels more. It feels enough. Really does.
I think I heard you make that comment when you were talking to Steven in one of your last episodes.
Yeah, yeah. I had that sort of doubt in my mind, but I think it's okay.
If I don't know if anyone has this modification by you, but what I did do when I put the fisters on that 997 is I also got the cross pipe. I took out the resonator in the middle, and I got the X pipe, I think they called it.
I don't know if you can do that on a 0.1 though, can you? I know the 0.2s, people do the Shark. Is that the Shark Works and they do the cross pipe? I don't know. I think the 0.1, there's something...
Oh, it's not compatible with that. Okay.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
I don't think it's compatible unless there's something else from, another supplier, another manufacturer, which maybe there is. Maybe I need to look into that, but I think it's okay for now. So you had the 997, pandemic started. We all know that's still going. It hasn't finished. And then you are Porscheless. You don't have a Porsche. So what do you buy? You've had all those other cars in between. You buy some motorcycles and you buy some other cars. What happens in between before we get to your last car, your last Porsche?
You know what filled the gap, and I still have it, and I absolutely love it. Is I bought a 2008 Mini Cooper S, cool. And Michael, I know I'm super late to the party, but what a fun little car. It's a little go-kart. It's a manual. It has a beautiful saddle interior it's a convertible.
Yes.
I don't know what people thought of me when I bought it compared to some of the cars I might have owned in the past, but I don't care.
What year is it, Derek? Your Mini Cooper?
It's an '08, so it was I think the last year. It was either the last year or the second last year of the first generation supercharged motors.
Fantastic.
Before they went turbocharged, which in my opinion, in terms of reliability, but also for driving experience, if you were going to find a car, you'd want to get the supercharged first generation. They're just so much fun.
Yeah, it's a great. I mean, it's a great car. It's a very popular car, obviously in the UK and even in Australia here. But it's a lot smaller to what you've owned before, right? It's quite a small car. It's chunky. I mean, the Minis are chunky, but they've got a bit of width to them. But they're a small car.
They are. But a lot like Porsche, even like the 356, inside there's way more room than you think, which is fantastic. Also, what I appreciate about that car. It's 4 seats, and the wheels are pushed out to the absolute edges. It reminds me a lot of the 992. They move the wheels out just about as far as they could go, and I really think it's fantastic.
In saying that, let me just share your Instagram. That's okay to share your Instagram, Derek?
Yeah, of course.
If you want to go and follow Derek on his Instagram, it's 11 past 9. Spelt ELEVEN past 9 NEIN. I'll put the link to his Instagram, to Derek's Instagram, in the description of this podcast. Go and have a look while we're talking at the last stages of the podcast, and you'll see the Mini Cooper S is a bit further down, and Derek's other cars that he's owned, plus his motorcycles. It's a really good page, so make sure you give Derek a follow. Mini Cooper S, good choice. I mean, I think it's a good choice. I mean, I've spoken to other owners who have had Minis as well, or own Minis, as well as 911s. Great driver's car, fun driver's car. So you had the bikes, you got that little bit of a gap. So you had some more motorcycles you bought along the line. Is this when you bought the R9T? That's the R9T as well, isn't it, that you bought?
Yeah, I think I had the R9T for the last few years. Maybe 4 years. It's a 014. So I bought it used with very low miles, and that's a beautiful bike. Fantastic.
So then when does it start happening, when you start thinking, I shouldn't have sold my Porsche. I need to have one in my garage. I'm going to start looking, but this time I'm going to look for something pretty special as well. How does it come about? How does the next one come about? And everyone knows what it is because it's in the description of the podcast, the title of the podcast. But how does your next 911 come to be, Derek?
Oh, it was a lot of work. It was a lot of work. It was, so I had in my mind that if I've always wanted a long hood. I've always wanted an F body. I just think they're just the most beautiful shape, and where everything comes from. It's the taproot car. And I had a picture at a car show, probably going back 10 or 15 years, of myself with some folks, and I was kneeling in front of a 912, but it was an Albert Blue 912, and I just thought it was the most beautiful car I'd ever seen. And I always promised myself that someday in my Porsche ownership that I'd have a long hood Albert Blue Porsche, and it was a 911T, and I looked specifically for a 1972.
72 is the year, right? I mean, you know what makes me think of the 72 as I think of that article that I've read, I think, so many times, the Car and Driver article. Have you seen that? The original article from 1972, and it's online at the moment. And it's the 911 where they review the 911T, the E, and the S all together. Car and Driver review from the 70s. And I think they praise the T about how, even though the power is not as much as the E and the S, the experience is, if not better, because the car's quite light. But before we get into that, how did you say you wanted an Albert Blue, and that's a beautiful color, but how do you to find a 911T in 72 model, to find it in, to find one of those in good condition, how do you find one that's also in Albert Blue? How long does that take you?
It took me about, I would say, 3 years.
3 years.
3 years of every day going to the same, not only the usual spots of looking for cars, hoping they'll pop up, but going to the early 911S registry boards and spending time and getting to know folks, and honestly just sending notes out and saying, hey, do you know anyone who knows anyone? And just making connections, because I think you're right. Again, you shouldn't pick color over condition, but in this case, I was absolutely dead set on having an Albert Blue, which really limited me. And I'll have to say, I want to praise that board, the early 911S registry board, as well as a bunch of other folks that if they know, they'll say like, hey, I got a buddy who knows someone that might own one. Yeah. And you just go down the rabbit hole and you have a lot of conversations, and a lot of them turn up dead ends. And I also found you met a lot of owners that thought maybe they wanted to sell their car, but they really didn't, and through conversations, you had to almost be a psychologist and make them understand that they're not ready to let go. And so that's okay too. But I found my car eventually. It was someone who knew someone that knew someone that had one, and they were maybe going to sell it once they did a rally. And they were good enough to put me in touch with the person, and I had conversations with this person. He wasn't sure if he was going to sell it. If he did, he didn't know what he was going to sell it for. And that process took another 8 months or so of just waiting till he was ready. And when he was ready, it was one of those, swallow your fear of a cost of the car. And if you're going to do it, or you could wait another couple of years and try to find another one. So I decided to jump in.
I was going to say, I mean, that's the risk that you're playing there, isn't it? The fact that you are going to pay top dollar for this car because people know you really want it. They really know you want the color. As friendly as our Porsche community is, people want to sell their car at the right price. And I think, getting the right color, and it's like, talking to Blair a couple of weeks ago, who had the GT4 in the US, who bought a white one and hated the color. Even though it was the perfect condition GT4, he bought the white, didn't like it. 2 weeks later, he sold it because what he really wanted was a fun color, so he got a blue. And I think we all do that. Like, it's almost the perfect spec except for one thing. But if it's the color that you really do dislike, it's going to bug you for so long. And I think that's great that you actually pursued it for that long, because that's a long time to be chasing a car. 3 years. That's quite a long time. And when you got the car, though, you said that you preferred the color over the condition. Was the condition okay or not?
The condition was okay. What was really cool about this car is it was a pretty special car. It had the matching numbers motor.
Okay.
But that was outside the car. And in it, the owner had put a 2.7 liter hot rod motor in.
Okay.
And and he had lowered it to, I think, rest of world height, maybe even a touch lower. It has a nice stance to it, and did a couple other small modifications to it, including some seats and whatnot. And so it wasn't that 356 that was in a bubble,
Yes.
perfect, don't touch it, which I kind of like. I'm kind of at a point where I would love to put my personality in it a little bit and do what I would want to do, and I don't feel like it's sacrosanct, which is great. But the color was everything for sure. That 356, I love the red, I loved it, but every time I looked at it, it wasn't a Bally blue, and I learned a lesson from that, and I said, I don't care how long it takes, I'm going to find an Albert blue.
I don't know what it is about blue and long hoods, but they kind of work really well together. Blue, the blues they just work with the shapes so well. They really do. So the original engine, the matching number engine, you have that engine as well that came with the car, did you say, or it didn't come?
I do.
So it's got a 2.7 in, the original was 2.4. 2.4, wasn't it? Do you think you'll ever put that engine back in, or are you just going to leave the 2.7 in it for now?
You know what? Having driven it with the 2.7, I sure want to keep it in there. It is such an amazing engine in that car, and it makes the most beautiful sounds that I think the 2.4, I'm going to get in great shape, and I'm going to keep it. And, it's only a couple bolts to swap them out. And so maybe if someday, maybe I will, but God, that 2.7 is a monster.
Fantastic. You know what I think's cool though, that you have actually got the matching number. And like you said, you've got it on the side. You can work on it. You can get other people to help you with it, with the things you don't know what to do. You can put it in a crate, and you've got the original engine for the car. You know what I mean? You can just make it perfect, even if it is, I don't know how perfect it is, but you can make it perfect. So it's kind of like it's a good project, right? It's a great thing to have in a way.
It's insane to say, right? Because who would rebuild a motor you're never going to use and just to have it? But I do. I have it on an engine stand, and I want to make it perfect, and I want to keep it.
I think we'd all would do that, Derek. We'd all do that, because then you've got, you're driving the car, you're enjoying the car. It's not off the road. You've got the 2.7, like you said, but then you've got the original, and you can just make it, perfect.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I feel like you're doing a service to the car by keeping them together. And even if I never put it in, it was what it was born with, and it just feels right. And I know that sounds weird, but it's really cool.
So you're searching for 3 years. You do the deal with the guy. You pay a little bit more for it, but it's worth it. You've got a great car. You've got the, like I said, 72 911T. First drive. How was it compared to all those other Porsches you've owned and driven?
I finally found the 911 SC and surpassed it.
Fantastic.
It was everything I thought it would be and more. And people had said, until you drive a long hood, you just don't really understand it. And I always thought that was a lot of, silliness, right? Because there's a lot of amazing cars. There really are. And Porsches, every one of Porsche's marquees the cars are fantastic in their own way. But God, Michael, like the 2.7 in that, the sound, it looks from the outside, especially in Albert Blue, it on the curves of that car, it makes it look very, I want to say quaint. It's a very pretty car. And
it is.
In the Albert Blue, it's not like some of the other blues, like Aga Blue, where it might look a little bit dated in a good way, like period, I should say.
Yeah.
The Albert Blue is modern enough that it looks great, but it still looks like a classic Porsche. Michael, when you get in that car and you bury it, the hot rodded 2.7, I think it's putting out around, I was told around 250 or 260.
Really?
And
the original was only about 150, 160, wasn't it?
It might have even been less. It might have even been maybe 140. I'm afraid I don't know.
Wow, that's a lot in such a light car as well. That must be a real experience.
It's fast. It is, but even beyond it being fast, the visceral sound. You feel like you're in an old Porsche race car. And I've never been in a 2.7 RS, and I most likely never will. But if this comes anywhere near to that, I can see why people love those cars so much, because the sound, the responsiveness, the anger. It feels like a real race car. And yet you can hop in it and I've done a couple hundred miles at a time, and on the highway, it's perfectly, docile.
And it looks like it's in really nice condition, the paintwork from the images on your Instagram. I'm just looking at it now. And the wheels, the Fuchs look like they're in perfect condition.
They're in, I would say there's a patina on the paint and there's a patina on the wheels that when you get up close, you can see them. But I feel like if I were to do anything beyond just, some, like light restoration in terms of, buffing and whatnot, then I wouldn't want to, I'd be afraid of, hurting it. Yeah. So I'm okay with that.
So you've got a 911 that surpasses the SC. You can drive it. You're not scared to drive it. You've got the spare engine. It's almost the perfect situation, isn't it? And that last picture you posted on your Instagram, the one where you're in the country, obviously near where you live, is just such a great stance from the rear. When you see the car from the rear, it's just got such a nice shape. It really does.
It really sits down well. The previous owner did a nice job with the suspension, and it does have a Momo prototypo steering wheel. So the smaller diameter actually, I think, makes it feel a little bit racier. And it's really nice. It's just so tactile. It's by far the most engaging car I've ever owned out of any car I've owned, maybe approaching some of the motorcycles in terms of just pure mechanical, joy. So I'm absolutely over the moon with it. And,
Fantastic.
Having owned the cars I've owned, I think this is maybe the one I'd say that I'm going to keep.
You're going to keep this one, yeah.
Yeah.
And sure. worth the money, that's for sure. Absolutely. The 911T is a beautiful one. How about the sound before we get into your favorite drives? How about the sound? Has the sound been tweaked or is it just standard, the exhaust?
So great question. It's currently a Porsche heater box and Porsche, I think it might be a regular Porsche muffler.
Right.
But there's a small oil leak I'm working on fixing. And so I'm going to be putting SSI heater boxes on there. And so the big question is what to do about the muffler. Do I put the original one on, the 2.7, or do I go down the road that you and Steven keep batting around of what to do?
Steve's changing his muffler again, I think.
Oh, is he?
I don't know. I won't give it away. See what happens. Derek, we're almost at the end. We've gone over a little bit, but let's get into the drives. You've got this great 911T. You got the 72, 2.7 liter hot rod. We'll call it a hot rod. When in the region you live, in the New England region, New Hampshire, if someone's coming to your area and they want to take their car, their Porsche, on a really cool drive, where would you recommend for getting the best experience?
There are, so in the northern states of New England and Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, it's really mountainous country. It's just absolutely gorgeous with twisty roads almost anywhere. But if I had to pick one, it's one I actually just discovered this fall. And having lived here my whole life and driven around New England, daily with my job, I had never been to what they call the Northern Kingdom of Vermont. And it's this area, if you look at Vermont, and it's the upper right-hand corner, and right. It's where all the farms, where they make all the cheese, where they make all the dairy from, the state of Vermont. And they have the most gorgeous roads and just pastoral farms that you crest hills, and there's no one there. There's no one there. Wow. And the roads are yours. And to drive that in fall it's from a picture book.
Fantastic. And you can take the family because you've got 4 seats. Do your boys fit in the back? That. Do your boys fit in the back? It's not too small?
Even if I have to fold them in half, they're going to fit in the back.
Because they are a bit small, those long hoods in the back seats. I've sat in one a long, long time ago, and it's a bit of a twist to get in there, that's for sure.
Yep. Yeah, well, they're going to gladly try because it's a fantastic sound. I remember specifically with the with my 930 that I used to put one of my sons to sleep in the back seat. He'd just fall asleep to the sound.
To the vibration and the noise.
Yep.
All right, I just want to tell the listeners again, go and look at Derek's Instagram. It's 9. 9 is spelled Nein. I'll put the link in the description. Have a look at his Instagram. Give him a follow. Tell him you heard his story on PorscheCooled Owner Stories. Derek, we're at the end. We've almost gone to an hour and a half. Is there anything else you want to share with the listeners before we go today?
Gosh, well, thank you for the time. It was fun. It was fun talking about some of these older cars.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say is, if I were to look back into some of the cars that I've been really lucky enough to have, is that the only thing I'd say maybe to the younger owners, the aspiring Porsche owners, is don't wait. I think a lot of people say, like, I'm going to make a goal for myself later in life, or if I have some sort of situation down the line, then I'll do it. But the cars now are unfortunately so expensive. But if you can find whatever it is considered entry level now, and that's a whole different discussion, I would say just do it. Because you'll build your driving repertoire from there, but you'll fall in love with the brand, and whatever you'll find, you're going to enjoy. So I'm glad I did. I'm glad I started early, and it's been a fun ride, and thanks for taking me back down that journey. I appreciate it.
No, it was great to chat. And I think you're spot on with what you just said then, like experience it now. You know what I mean? Don't wait, don't try and save for a GT3 or something so expensive that's out of your reach now. Just get a Porsche that you can afford. And enjoy it like what you have. And I think you really have. You've owned 11 Porsches. Of course, we've got the Cayenne in there, which is your wife's car, which we didn't talk that much about. But you've had 11 Porsches. Your current one, I mean, you've from the 924, 944s. 924 was a project which didn't work out. The 944, the SCs, the Boxsters, 993, 356C, which maybe one day you'll grab another one, you think, Derek?
I can definitely see that. Yeah, I do miss that car. I took it racing once on a racetrack, and it was really fun. And I could definitely see myself owning that again.
But the and now the 997. Now you've got the 911T, and you waited for the right color. You waited for the right car, and I think you've told the listeners today that it was definitely worth the wait, and you've definitely got a keeper for sure, Derek. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for being on Owner Stories. I really appreciate it.
It was a real pleasure. Cheers.
All right, everyone. That's Derek coming in from New Hampshire. Derek with his 1972 Porsche 911T Albert Blue 2.7, originally a 2.4. He's got the spare engine, even better. And he's also got a Cayenne, which is his wife's car. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to the PorscheCooled Podcast. Bye for now.